Greetings and welcome back to another chat. And in fact, after I recorded the last chat, nihilism, it was only when I was uploading it that I realized that when I put in the number, it was number 50. So I hadn't realized that it was the 50th episode of my Perspectives chats. And it would have been nice maybe to said something like, wow, I can't believe I've said so much. I never thought I had 50 video chats in me. Or likewise, something like, I can't believe that some of you kind souls out there have labored to watch 50 or at least a good part of these videos. So maybe we should both pat ourselves on the backs for getting this far. So now this means that this video will be number 51. So how much further I can get, how much further we can take, we don't know yet. Let's just, as always, go with the flow and see where we go. So this is going to be another ism, because as you've noticed from the opening name card, this one is called Infantilism, and coming on the back of nihilism. And of course, these thoughts that are occurring to me now or recently, back of my mind, is, of course, you probably know that my area of interest is the kind of intersection between human society and consciousness or perception, cognition, really how these aspects of the human being and the potentials of the human condition intersect with human society. And of course, the state of human society also is of interest to my passing mind. So, and a lot I talk about is the effect of social cultural conditioning upon the growth of the individual. And I've talked before about how when we come into the world, when we incarnate, we come with amnesia. We don't know anything about previous existence. But when we are born, we have let's say an innate sense of being and beingness, and that's why often we say, or it's noted, how young babies and young infants have this wonder and awe about the world. This almost, people say that young infants are like speaking with unseen beings, or they have this world about them, because they come in, we are having an innate beingness which just doesn't have the tools, doesn't have the acquisitions to really engage with the physical world until they are taught. And then we say an individual acquires the personality. So the personality is our social cultural conditioning, which to a certain degree is necessary to give us the tools to engage with the construct around us. And then, of course, under that, we have our being, the human being. Now, what often happens, or what is the case, is that, and I've talked about this before, is that if the conditioning becomes dominant, then the personality becomes dominant and it closes down the growth of the being. So you get a kind of state of arrested development or stunted growth of the being, and the personality becomes the dominant way to interface with the physical world. So really, we're just a bunch, human beings are a bunch of personalities trying to deal with the world, and we are interfacing through our personality, and we believe we are the personality, and we close off the being. And so for me, that's like a state of infantilism, because the being is not allowed to grow, to develop, to express itself, to manifest, to emanate through our body, our interaction with the world, so it stays at the level of an infant. And we can see this because there's instances where people of strong personality have encountered themselves in a situation of shock or fear or uncertainty, and they lose it. They lose the plot, as we say. And that's because in such instances of this shock or uncertainty or unpredictability, the personality just drops away and you're left with your being. But if your being is like an infant, then you shrivel up, you are seen for the state of your beingness as you are. I sometimes consider how there are, for example, take an example of like the financial crash of 2008. We saw instances of these very high-level financial people and bankers committing suicide because they felt they had lost everything. They had lost everything, and their world as they knew it had collapsed, and so there was a certain number of financial suicides. And I've often wondered, what state would that person have to be in to say, I've lost all my financial security, my way of life, therefore life has no meaning, I can't deal with it. I would have thought, in that case, would you not say, okay, my financial world has dropped, I now need to rearrange my life, shift everything around and start over again? And would that be a challenge? Maybe you want to get out of the financial world and all this, it's a kind of challenge you face. But is it something that makes you commit suicide? Is that down to the state of one's being once the personality has had a shock? The reason I'm saying this is because now, of course, we're dealing with the digital age, and we're dealing with a phase in human civilization where more and more people are going to be interfacing with a digital world, with their devices and the digital ecosystem and the machinic construct and architecture. And the more that we project ourselves into our devices and our architecture, perhaps that means the more that feeds a personality, because I can't see how the digital architecture is going to feed the being. And so what does that pertain to the future of the development of the human being? Does that mean that we're going to be pushed further and further out in our personality? And now think about the younger generation. Now we know that the worst kind of examples of that are some so-called Instagram influencers, people who spend all the time twittering and bickering and bitching on their Twitters and social media and trolling and all this type of stuff. And all this is just acting through the personality. Because if you brought forth an ounce of genuine, authentic beingness, then you wouldn't be bickering and twittering and bitching through your social media. But of course, being pulled out of ourselves into this external physical digital ecosystem, on an architecture as I refer to it, then you are being pulled away from the being. It's often said that some of the most down to earth, and sometimes we call them the salt of the earth, the people who are really more in tune with their, let's say, being, are often people who are not what we would call let's say socially cultured in these social environments. People who are working with the land, for example, people who are like farming the land, people who probably have less exposure to all these modern urban digital constructs. Such people are the salt of the earth. They're much closer to their natural innate being because they've not grown up, or they don't live in environments that you need to project a dominant personality, or that pulls a personality out to interface in these social cultural situations. Because all these cultural situations, these, whatever, you go to an event, you go to a gathering, you interact with people, you go through your personality. And we have personalities. We have the work personality, where we deal with our work colleagues. We have the personality that deal with our bosses, for example. A personality that we have with our intimate friends at home. And of course, we have these subset personalities that sometimes get thrown together. For example, if you've invited your boss over for a dinner, and of course you're on your best behavior because you're still interacting with the boss as in these social circumstances. They are the boss, you are the employee, you don't want to mess it up, you want to look good. And then what happens is that during this dinner, you get an unexpected call from your best buddy, who you always kind of like hang out with and are really on intimate terms, and they come in. Now you've got a clash of two personalities. Do you act through the personality of employee and boss in front of your friend, or do you try to be more friendly with your friend and let your boss see your home personality? So you see, all these are our roles we play, whereas the beingness isn't a role, it's innate. And the more that we are projecting ourselves through the social media digital construct, the more, I suspect, we'll be engaging through the personality, which is a bit like a kind of avatar. The personality is a physical avatar of our presence, which is obviously, when you get to the digital avatars online, it's another step removed. And I don't think I want to start talking about digital avatars just yet. That was Pampy barking, sending me down his being personality. Or mostly being, I guess, because he just is as he is. I don't think these animals have to worry too much about false personalities. He just is all the same with everybody, whether it's me, with his pappy, or with his buddy, or with his grandparents. He just acts the same. So another thing is that talking about being in your personality or being more in your being, what makes us more open to receiving impacts or even developmental impacts? Because there's influences of the world which are just physical, material impacts, or everyday impacts. And of course, I'm fairly safe to say that there are also influences and impacts entering our reality domain that could be of a developmental impulse, that could help us to, or trigger us and to push us a bit further. And these impulses can come through books or films and other popular culture. It can come from people that we meet accidentally that help to give us some information or to put us on our way. And it seems that when we are in more of our being, we're more open to these impacts, we attract them more. But when we're more fully in our personality, we're more closed off to these impacts. We don't see them, we don't notice them. They're around us all the time. We can read a book and see a film, but if we only engage on it through our personality, we probably don't pick up the influences that are being put in there. And both positive and negative. There are developmental impulses being put into transmission in our cultures, and there's also the predictive programming being put in, of course, to negatively influence us. If we don't have a sense of being, how will we be able to discern that there are these impulses here that we can use to, that's an idea, I'm going to follow that, I'm going to trace it, I'm going to get this other book, I'm going to see how they connect, and maybe it will lead me somewhere. You have sometimes that coincidence where a book just seems to fall out at you at the right time and gives you a piece of information you need. That's being attracted through a certain quality of being towards some information. But the personality, the more we live in the personality, we don't get those attractions so much. So of course the question is, what makes the difference between information and knowledge? If we receive information through our personality only, then we are less capable perhaps to turn it into knowledge, because knowledge requires a certain degree of understanding, which has to come through some part of our being to make it more comprehensible. So is it that we as a society are going forward more through our personality and more through our information rather than through our human beingness and through a state of knowledge? And of course, if we're just racing ahead through personality, conditioning, information, then we're not going to be at a psychological level of our, let's say, technologies or innovations. Our technologies are going to be racing ahead through technological capacity, but psychologically, we're infantile. We don't have the maturity of being, human beingness, to deal with the impact and the potential of these technologies. Hence, we tend to use technologies that don't work for us, whether it's through military and atomic and nuclear uses of technology, or through the surveillance and the control mechanisms of the digital apparatus. Whereas, of course, if we operated through knowledge and beingness, the same technologies could be used in a much more constructive way. So we're racing ahead through being infantile, perhaps as a human species. So if we have a dominant state of infantilism as a human species, what does that tell us, or what does that bode for the future? These are just some thoughts. I haven't structured them out to make a resolution. They're just thoughts, as you know, that I'm going through. Maybe it sounds a bit heavy, but maybe we do need to think about these. And if we can think about them, then maybe we can attract some of these ideas to us. So if the mass of society, of human society, collectively on the whole, is functioning through personality and through information, then that means on the other side, there's room for a small number, a small percentage of humanity to start living more through the being, start to seek to develop the being and to transform information into knowledge. Doesn't have to be a large group, never is actually, but there's always room for a small segment of any society to break away from the personality and to seek to develop the internal sense, the beingness, and to acquire knowledge, not just accumulate information. Let us hope that that segment of society exists. Let us have a certain amount of human faith or cosmic faith that there'll always be a section or segment of humanity that are operating, seeking, developing, utilizing the developmental impulse to develop the beingness of the human species. Just some thoughts for today, which is actually the 1st of May, the International Day, the Workers' Day. And since it is the Workers' Day, the focus is on the work. So thanks for joining me thus far. As always, I'll keep my thoughts going, my mind turning around, and let us continue to stay in our being, stay sane, be grounded, and until next time, cheers.